Welcome back to another Thirsty Thursday podcast. I'm Noah Jones with my co-conspirator Blake Longfellow. We're going to be joined today by a guy named Marco. He is the podcast host for the Truth Beer Podsequences. I really enjoy this podcast where I'm really excited to do a little bit of a deep dive into the 127 episode podcast. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, you have a lot to catch up on. But, without any other hesitation, Marco, how are you doing today?
Doing great, gentlemen. Thanks for asking me to join.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Again, I really enjoy your podcast, and I think that you guys are doing something really interesting that I'm just not all that sure how many cities are able to have a podcast about Cincinnati beer podcasts. Well, probably no city can have that, but the city of Cincinnati. But how many podcasts can have one about their city's podcast that cover different beer? I also sort of skipped ahead. Normally, we talk about the beers that we're drinking. Blake, you are drinking something that is especially fishy. Tell me about it.
Yeah, my buddy Ronald Lynch, who's on the Miss Beer Behavior podcast up in where I live, he gave me this high grain bourbon barrel oyster stout. So it looked it just looked interesting. He let me have it. So,
well, have you had any yet? What does it taste like?
No, I don't know. I haven't.
Well, give it a spit. Let's.
It's definitely a stout. Maybe a little saltiness.
Okay, I figured it had to be a little salty. I don't know that it's the kind of thing I would go for, but if you, is it a positive?
A friend gives you a beer, you don't say no.
It's perfect for Bengals fans.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a little salty this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, precisely. And Marco, what are you drinking?
I'm having Mad Tree Psychopathy.
Oh,
nice.
Okay. Very interesting. And I am having Santa's Bribe, also known as Santa's Bible.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I accidentally called it last week. And it was so kind of the Truth Beer Podsequences to let me know that I mispronounced the name of it. And yeah.
If we're anything, we're kind.
Yeah. Kind is the word I would use as well. For sure. So, Marco, tell us a little bit about how you got into. I guess we'll start at the very basics. Like, tell us a little bit about how you became a fan of craft beer.
So, I think like anybody my age, we had a lot of macro beer. That's what was available. And then one of my supervisors at my job, right when I was 18, and being from Louisiana, I was legal to drink at 18. And he's like, you need to try some real beer. And then we went to a gas station in the town over and picked up some Pete's Wicked Ale. And from there just progressed into craft. And then from there, when I moved to Ohio it was over 18 years ago, I started homebrewing. I homebrewed for 10 years. And after I homebrewed for 10 years, I felt like I needed to do more in the craft beer scene. So I talked to my wife. I said, I'm going to find a way to be in the craft beer scene, even if it's sitting at a craft beer bar and, or a brewery, and then just being around so much that they like an opportunity comes up. Well, that's kind of how it happened. And then I wound up being a brewer at Valley Vineyards Cellar Dweller for 7 or 8 years. And then, which then led to bartending. And then, I was a retail manager ever since I was 18. So restaurant and retail. So then that led to, these were all just stepping stones. And then the podcast happened. And then the opportunity to be a taproom manager, I got approached and I was like, yeah, it's time to go full time in craft. So that's how that happened.
There was a lot in there, but the number one thing that I can't really understand is that Louisianans can start drinking at the age of 18.
Well, they did. I'm pretty middle age. I'm closer to 50,
Gotcha.
So
I just had never heard that. That's interesting.
Yeah, actually the year I turned 18, I believe I was grandfathered in. They moved it to 21.
Gotcha.
Um, but Louisiana's drinking scene at the time, it's the New Orleans area, so it was kind of crazy, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, you could drive up to a daiquiri shop, order uh, a, a margarita and a mudslide with 2 shots of Jägermeister, and you'd get up to the drive-through window, and they'd hand you the 2 shots of Jägermeister. You'd shoot the 2 shots of Jägermeister, hand the shot glasses back to the person at the drive-through window, and then they'd hand you your daiquiris.
Wow.
But they wouldn't put the straw in it because that hex in the lid, that's the closed container. At least it was
Ah,
back then.
gotcha. Interesting. What
Now
different
Ohio
countries
has
are
that
there?
now too, or they used to during COVID.
Right. Well, it's legal to get to go drinks for sure. I don't think it's legal to sit in someone's drive through and take a shot, but it is
Yeah.
legal to get to go drinks. Although I don't know how many different establishments continued on with the practice of selling to go drinks. I think it's a now that it's legal, it needs to become part of the culture, and that helps to grow the overall scene itself. And so I'm for it. Um, just everyone be safe out there. But
Hmm.
other than that, I'm for it.
Gotcha. So going back to the Truth Beer Podsequences,
Hmm.
you obviously working in a tap room for at least 7 years, and then also brewing on your own for 10 as well. I mean, you clearly have a passion for craft beer, and then you're able to sort of take all of that information and passion and create a podcast that, again, I really enjoy. Tell me a little bit about the thought process of, I guess, I mean, not in a negative way necessarily, but judging other people doing that sort of thing. Like, what was the thought behind that, I guess?
So what I'll do is I'm going to go back a little bit and give a little bit of the story about how the podcast actually
Great.
developed,
Yeah,
and then
great.
I'll answer that question as sort of a natural progression. So I was listening to Cincy Brewcast I don't know, whatever it was 8 years ago or whatever that was when it was very early on. I was listening when Mike Cisneros was on and with some of the the first episodes of the podcast, and I got told about it through a friend in the brewing industry, so I got latched onto that one, and then I got on latched onto several different other podcasts. But one show that I really really love. Anybody who knows me knows I talk about it all the time. Is the Dan Lebitard show with Stu Gatz, which used to be on Fusion Network and ESPN, and now it's their own entity on YouTube. They have a YouTube channel. I love that show. Well, anyways, so listening to all these different things at the same time and having a passion for craft. Uh, it became once the COVID lockdown happened and the Gnarly Gnome started doing the weekly pint. I would participate in the weekly pint, and I would participate via the chat. And by the way, tonight as well, never mind, not tonight. Um, uh, the chat is a fun way to interact, but I also would call in just because I felt like somebody needed to interact with him, and why not me? And I would kind of try to nudge other people to call in, and there's not too many callers, but um, I would call in, and it got to the point where we had several different Cincinnati-based craft beer podcasts. I was listening to several different ones, but on all these different Facebook groups, there was always this one lady who seemed to have a very sharp head on their shoulders about craft and was really passionate. And that person was Julia, who is my co-host on Truth Beer and Podsequences. So one day I called into the pod and I gave my opinion. I believe it was actually about females in the brewing industry. And then I just blurted out on the Weekly Pint, I'm going to start a podcast about all the Cincinnati based craft beer podcasts. And I want Julia to be my co host. And I had never met her, never talked with her, any of that. And so shortly after the end of the Weekly Pint, Julia reached out to me, found me because she's the queen of screens. She can find things very quickly. She reached out to me on social media and asked if I was serious. And I said, absolutely, I'm serious. So we took a couple of months to try to find a time to get together. I think we finally got together. I think it was early March of 2020, which is the perfect time to get together face to face and try and hash stuff out. Anyways, so we got together, bought some equipment, and started to vet out ideas and see if we were compatible to co-host the podcast. And we had a ton of ideas, many of which were just not feasible or not doable in what we wanted to do was a 40-minute podcast. And I even remember telling the Gnarly Gnome, I was like, we want to do a 40-minute podcast because we want to keep it short to where people won't lose their attention span. And he's like, yeah, good luck. Well, that turned out to be many. That turned out to be a good piece of a string of great advice that he gave us. It's like, you're not going to hold that to 40 minutes. So, but anyway, so that's sort of how we got together and started Truth, Beer, and Podsequences. And that has also evolved to our sister podcast, which is Cincy Beer Events, which is exactly what it sounds like. We take about 20 minutes and tell you about all the big beer events in the Cincinnati area. And even that was an idea that was supposed to be not every week. We were supposed to do that maybe once a month or something. And then it just evolved to, okay, let's do a warm up. The Cincy Beer Events, or it started as a 0.5, meant to be our warm up to make sure the mics were working, the headsets to get our voices in tune. It was sort of like our me, right? And so, anyways, but we liked telling people about these events, and eventually we wound up just spinning it off. But to answer your question from, I don't know, 10 minutes ago or whatever, what we do is we try to keep it to podcasts that are in the greater Cincinnati area. And when a podcast that is outside of the greater Cincinnati area talks about something inside the greater Cincinnati area, then we will dive into that podcast. So, the Brewery Explorer podcast, it goes in and out of something that we will cover. Right. So do many other podcasts. Jungle Jim's podcast. We did like the Northern Kentucky Business Association or something like that because they were talking about beer kiss. And so we listen to those podcasts, and the joke is that Julie and I take exactly the same notes, and we try to make it interesting, and hopefully we succeed more than we fail, although some weeks that scale tips, and that's all up to the listener. But as long as we're still having fun, then we feel like it's up to you, and hopefully you enjoy it. So hopefully that answers a little bit of your question.
Yeah, for sure.
No, we truly enjoy listening, and we can't thank you enough for all the times you've highlighted us and given us props for, especially for us being our first year going into our second season. It's been an amazing ride,
You're very welcome. And, again, I've said it on Truth, Beer, and Podsequences. Congratulations to you for the great start that you've had. Just, being able to sit down and talk to great guests, that's it's really great. And I look forward to all of the different guests that you're able to sit down with and make this second season something that we talk about.
Yeah, I mean, we really have tried hard to top the year that we just finished. I think that we will in some ways, and we probably won't in other ways. But I think that all you can do is keep trying, right? So that's what we're doing.
Because this week actually kicks off our second season.
That's right.
With Warped Wings when we were at the Whiskey Rebellion. So that was a real fun one we did together. Got a little toasty that day, but it was fun.
Yeah, I can imagine that can happen. I mean, it can happen.
But if you
So
don't mind, I'd like to just ask you a couple more questions about Truth Beer Podsequences.
sure.
I mean, there are obviously it's sort of an infinite number of podcasts that talk about Cincinnati beer, from the sort of one and dones, like the Northern Kentucky one that may only talk about this one event once a year, to people like us who do it every once in a while, to people like Gnarly Gnome who do it whenever he creates a podcast. But talk to us a little bit about how much content there is annually, I guess, speaking. I mean, it just seems like Cincinnati podcasts about beer are plentiful.
Yeah. So actually, when we got started, say mid 2020, there was anywhere between 3 and 12 podcasts that would talk about Cincinnati craft beer in any given week. That sort of that number has sort of dwindled a little bit, depending on the podcast. Uh, hit or miss with the episodes, but also there are some podcasts that are out there from really esteemed beer writers that we put on our radar because they have talked about a brewery or to a brewer in the Cincinnati area. So we're listening to a lot of content. Well, we're listening to a lot of content, but what we have is a lot of different podcasts on our radar, really. So the net is wide, and as we keep going, it could get bigger. But if, say, I don't know, craft beer and brewing is talking to somebody, or if um, the Beersmith podcast Beersmith is talked to Adam Mills over at Sonder, now formerly of Cartridge Brewing. So uh, we'll have it and see it in our feed, and then when we see that, bam, that's a highlight for Cincinnati, then we'll go to it. And we work as a team to try and keep each other in the loop on when something is something is out that we need to listen to. So, I mean, we have a core group of podcasts that we know is pretty much going to fall in our wheelhouse just about every week. And then we have all of these other ones, which, I mean, it's silly, but we call them national. Every podcast you can listen to across the globe if you're just looking for it.
Sure.
So, but these are nationally esteemed beer writers, or people with way bigger platforms than we're probably ever going to get to, because they're probably trying, and we don't really try that hard outside of making the podcast.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely a lot to keep your eye on, and in some weeks it is a lot to actually recap. The listening to it, I don't find too difficult to listen to 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 different podcasts covering this stuff in a week.
Oh,
but
wow.
but recapping them can take a long time, especially
Sure.
since once we get started talking, it's tough to know when to hit the brakes and then move on to the next one. We've even tried timers, where we set a phone timer, and it would ding after, say, 8 minutes, to try to keep it moving. And if anybody really thought to go back and listen, they could tell when we were using timers, because we just never got too deep into anything, and we didn't have the little tangents that we would go on that at least we find are interesting, and also now provide Patreon content, because the Patreon episodes are actually unedited and have more in them than the podcast that is the general feed.
Gotcha. Blake, do you got anything?
So, what were the first couple things you started talking about when you first got started back in 2020?
So in 2020, of course, we were talking about Cincy Brewcast. Back then, also Sonder Stories was still coming out pretty regularly. Shift Beers was out there on a regular basis. The Brews Traveler, Matt Damaris, was putting out content pretty heavy with the Brews Travelers Outcast podcast, as well as Hustle and Brews. And then Craft Parenting Pod was putting stuff out there, and so those were definitely ones that we were listening to pretty early on. We would also comment on the Weekly Pint, and I'm trying to think of somebody else.
So,
Um,
Marco, are there any that like are no longer around that you miss?
so I think there was only 3 or 4 episodes of really awesome lady who did oh, Beer is Not for Boys. Her and her husband put out a few podcast episodes, and I thought they were really going to gain some traction, and then I think it was just one of those things where life sort of took them in a different direction. Honestly, the Sonder Stories podcast was something that I really enjoyed, and I get, again, it's one of those things where trying to grow a business, it just had to move. But I really enjoyed listening to that podcast. They had a lot of fun. It also didn't hurt that I knew several of the people personally that were on the podcast. So listening to Justin and Danny and listening to Chase and all of them is like these were people that I just happened to not be around, but I very easily could have been standing outside a beer garden or the beer garden at Sonder and having a similar conversation with them. So I felt a kind of an emotional connection to that podcast and still do, really. And so hopefully, we get something every, 2, 3 months, every quarter, because it was, it did get to a point where, okay, it's box season, so now this is our annual box show, and they did it last year. And hey, Chase, tell us about the beer. Well, I told you about the beer last year. Did it change? Well, not really. And so it was more of the banter back and forth about the what was going on right now. And so, however, you never know when somebody new is going to listen. So an annual podcast to somebody who's listened for forever, there are parts of redundancy. Just like when we are listening to somebody cover Boston beer. I mean, we've heard a lot of this stuff, um, but to somebody new, this is fresh for them.
Right.
And then one of the best newest ones, if you guys ever watched it, is the what Blake and Mike Morgan are doing out there with the Bruce Guys Happy Hour and Bruce Guys Booze News.
Oh
I
yeah, we're
mean,
Yeah.
definitely big fans of
We're
them.
big fans of
I,
them.
I am so jealous. I mean, I wish I could be half as good as what they're putting out. Honestly, I
Yeah.
mean that they're doing a fantastic job. So I guess we'll just stick to heckling them.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Blake, I'm about out of questions here. Do you have anything else?
But no, like Bruce guys, like how they always talk about all the different people they've had on. It's actually mind blowing everything they've covered already. And
Didn't they get to
early in,
speak with Sam Cook? Or sorry, not Sam Cook, but the owner of the
Jim
brewery.
Cook,
It is Sam Cook?
Jim.
Jim,
Jim. Okay. I thought for a
Yeah.
second I thought he was singing songs. But yeah, Jim Cook. I mean, that's an impressive get. Doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah, well, the story about how they got him too was also very impressive. I mean,
Oh, I
if
don't know that one.
oh well, you can watch Bruce Guy's Happy Hour. I'll just tell you a little bit about it. So um, I won't give the whole thing away, but Mike Morgan, a beer writer, beer historian for the Cincinnati area. He also is a professor. He's an attorney, and he helped with organizing Bachfest for several years, and is helping to save a lot of the historic buildings in downtown Cincinnati. He couldn't get a direct connection to to Jim Cook on his own. He had to basically run into somebody at the bar at Arnold's and get a phone number on a cocktail napkin, or an email address or a phone number on a cocktail napkin to get a hold of this guy. It's like, how many more books about Cincinnati beer does he need to write before you can actually, get a little conversation with Jim Cook? Um, but it's just like anything. It's like you go to the bar, you never know who you're going to meet.
Yeah.
And, you just talk and you find out cool stuff. It's like you guys were at Mad Tree, and, Noah was,
That's
just
still
in
one of the
line to get
wild.
a beer. And then he wound up right behind Ryan, who's the brewer.
Yeah, it's one of the most insane moments of my life, I think, actually, considering the conversations we had like an hour prior to me
Well,
meeting
we
him.
just did our trailer that day.
No, did we? I
Yeah,
thought.
we did our trailer that day
Oh, okay.
because
I
we
remember.
weren't getting anywhere.
Right, right. I remember running back to you and Eric, and I was like, "Guys, come behind me. The head brewer is in line with me." And Blake didn't believe me. He was like, "No, shut up."
And I just want to say I'm glad you guys started what you're doing, and congratulations on season 2. We want to, as Truth Beer and Podsequences, I know I'm speaking for both Julie and I, and Julia's, I couldn't have asked for a better co-host. She's absolutely phenomenal, but we're just happy to see more content being put out there about the Cincinnati craft beer scene, because we love the Cincinnati craft beer scene. The more people who are content creators, the more people who are posting pictures, talking about it, blogging about it, doing video blogs, this whatever it is, helps to do, like you were saying right in the intro, which is bring attention to our craft beer scene. And I don't know if there's many cities in the you know in the contiguous US that could do the kind of podcast that Julie and I do. I'm just happy that we're in one, and we're gonna keep doing this as long as it is something that it is fun and we're having fun with. And so the thank you, and congratulations on season 2, and thank you for having me.
Well,
No,
yeah.
thank
I
you.
mean,
But
thank
I
you
have
so
one more
much for that.
question.
Please come
How
on,
did you
let's
pick
go.
how do you pick heavy? How did you pick your location?
Okay, so when we decided to get together, I would every Tuesday, working my retail job, my Tuesday was my Friday. So I would leave work at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, and I would drive straight to BC's Bottle Lodge, Montgomery. I don't know. My car just drove there. Like it was almost automatic, even though it's not a Tesla. I would drive there. And so when I wanted to meet with Julia, I suggested meeting at BC's Bottle Lodge, Montgomery. And so we did, and we hosted the podcast there because the manager and the owners there, I knew them, and they said, "Have it here. Do the podcast here. We're happy to host you." And then it got to the point where it made sense for them to close that location because they're putting energy into opening BC's Brewing Company. So they still have the Liberty location, and then they're going to open BC's Brewing Company in Mason. And so at the time when they closed, I was bartending at Higher Gravity Summit Park. And ownership there said, "Well, come on over here, and you're welcome to have a space every Tuesday here." And we just picked Tuesday because, like I said, it was my Friday in the retail business, and so I would get out early enough to meet Julia, and that's how we started recording. Now, the cool thing is that we can make content about beer, we can make content about wine, about spirits, about cocktails. Being at Higher Gravity Summit Park, um, every now and then we'll go to a different brewery, but most of the time it's because we have a reason. We recorded at Sonder a few weeks ago because Julie and I needed to pick up family tradition bottles, and Tuesday was the last day to do it. So we went and recorded at Sonder and picked up our bottles. Um, Most recently with Kolsch Night, what we'll do is we'll show up, and instead of you know taking an hour and talking about the previous week and what's going on with the families, and or anything like that, we'll hurry up, get done, and then head over to Kolsch Night. And we use Kolsch Night to kind of hang out and have fun. So we don't record any content at Kolsch Night thus far. Every now and then we'll go over to um, Fretboard because it's not that far from Summit Park, and we'll go and maybe record some extra content or just decide to record there. But as far as recording, it's it's going to be Summit Park unless we have a reason to go somewhere else, or an inkling, or even if someone wants to invite us, we would consider going somewhere else to record there, like on a one-off basis. But that's how we decided, and ended up with uh, Higher Gravity Summit Park being our location for most of the podcast, and to the park's right there, so we can walk the park, get some extra content when the weather's nice. And even if we don't record extra content after a podcast recording, take a lap around a nice park is not too bad, you know.
Definitely. Well, Marco Penilla, thank you so much for joining Thirsty Thursdays. We look forward to your next podcast. And if you haven't checked out Truth Beer Podsequences, please be sure to do that. Where are you located on the interwebs?
Yeah, so we're at truthbeardpod.com. You can find us everywhere that you get your podcasts. Also, please follow our sister podcast, Cincy Beer Events, to find out what's going on in the city. If you know of a beer event, send it to us if we aren't presently talking about it. If you're a brewery, please get in touch with us. What's been really cool is over the just very recent past, over the past 2 weeks, we're starting to have breweries reach out to us about some of their cool content, and I love that. Not just because it means they know about us, but because that means now we can platform for them, and that's what it really is about, is platforming for them. It's no secret that January is tough in the craft beer business. It's no secret that craft beer as a category was down by volume this in 2023. So whatever we can do to help platform and make people aware of what's happening in the city, because there's a lot of great places that are trying to do some really fun stuff and also these places a lot of times have a great give back to the community. So let's keep our dollars local. Let's spend within the community, and let's support the businesses that are supporting local people.
Very well said. Very well said. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.